Welcome to Strange Tales on Defenders TV podcast, our spoiler-filled discussion of Doctor Strange issue number 1, Sorcerer Supreme of the Galaxy, part 1. Welcome back, fellow Defenders. This is Defenders TV Podcast, episode 171, where we are introducing and welcoming you to Strange Tales on Defenders TV Podcast, where we are looking at a spoiler-filled discussion of Doctor Strange, Sorcerer Supreme of the Galaxy, Part 1, by Mark Waid and Jesus Sayers. And I am one of your hosts, John.
And I'm your other host, Derek, for this episode of Strange Tales on Defenders TV Podcast. Yeah, that's a bit of a mouthful as a title for our episode with Doctor Strange, Sorcerer Supreme of the Galaxy, Part 1.
It is a long title. But I really wish they could snip it down a bit, to be honest.
I know, but with 391 issues so far of Doctor Strange, going back all the way to his 70s appearances, probably have to differentiate them somehow, so you can bind them all together in a comic book for people to buy when all 6 or 8 issues of these books come out.
Well, that's it, because we have issue 1, if there's part 1, there is subsection 3. I mean, yeah, it's a little bit of a mouthful, but we are really keen to get into this issue of Doctor Strange in Space, because this is our first official episode of Strange Tales on Defenders TV Podcast, and where we will be covering comic books. This comes from our history of doing Damnation, which was another Doctor Strange run, and its tie-in issues earlier on in the year, and it was the first time we had really done comic book reviews on Defenders TV Podcast, even though we are podcasting about the Marvel Netflix shows, all based on Marvel comic characters. And of course, for Strange Tales, we will be focusing on Doctor Strange, and in particular Mark Waid's run here, which was released and published back on the 5th of June of this year. But of course, we'll also be looking at characters that come from the Defenders, including Doctor Strange. He used to be a Defender of Earth. And of course, there will be some other additional characters that we'll look at as well, because my co-host here, Derek, is a massive fan of Nick Fury and his incarnation as a Howling Commando as well.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe we'll talk about the Howling Commandos. But definitely the reason we're going to be covering Nick Fury at some point over this time is that Doctor Strange and Nick Fury did share Strange Tales, their big comic book back in the 60s and 70s, with some fantastic stories from both of those characters. It's where I got to know Doctor Strange, and I think it's where you got to know a bit of Nick Fury as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And our final Marvel character that we will dip our toes into, so to speak, will be based around the absolute love and fandom that our other co-host, Chris, who also podcasts with us on Defenders TV Podcast, has, and that is Spider-Man. And again, because we have that lovely link that he, along with Doctor Strange, was created by Steve Ditko. So there is some connection between Doctor Strange and the other characters or groupings that we will cover on Strange Tales.
It's not all random here, folks.
No, we've really thought about this, obviously. So you can subscribe to Defenders TV Podcast and Strange Tales over on your podcast catcher of choice. Please just head on over to defenderstvpodcast.com and go to our subscribe section, where you can choose Apple Podcasts, Google Play, or any other good or evil podcast catcher of your choice. Subscribe, rate us, leave a review, all about Strange Tales on Defenders TV Podcast. So what we intend to do is to release the first 3 issues over the next month in our lead up, obviously, to Iron Fist as much as we can. And then what we will do is continue with Mark Waid's run from the September issue once a month. And in between our Marvel Netflix shows, then we will look to do and release 2 episodes of Strange Tales between Marvel Netflix shows.
Exactly. So really looking forward to discussing some more Doctor Strange. We really enjoyed doing Damnation, and after that we know we really wanted to follow up the storyline that we had in there. But let's get into it, John.
Yeah, absolutely. Derek, what are some of the details for this issue?
Well, this is the first issue in a new series. Mark Waid just took over from previous writer Donny Cates, who wrote the Damnation series and was a great addition to the wonderful writers that have been on Doctor Strange so far. So hopefully Mark is going to make his big impact on this book. He has worked on Doctor Strange before. He did an excellent run called The Doctor Is Out, John. I think you're aware of that one.
Yes, I certainly am, and we will briefly talk about that as we get into the podcast as well.
Excellent. And the artwork in this book, including the cover art, is done by Jesus Saez, as John mentioned earlier on. Jesus is bringing a really good touch to this book. One of the exciting things always about Doctor Strange is that because he's got magic powers and because he travels to different realms, artists get to do a lot of different stuff on Doctor Strange books rather than just drawing standard buildings and fights in the street. We get a lot of magic and stuff going on, so really excited to see what Jesus brings to this book as well. John, do you want to give us the synopsis for this issue of Doctor Strange, Sorcerer Supreme of the Galaxy?
Sure. The Eye of Agamotto is closed. Dr. Stephen Strange has lost his connection to the Earth's arcane power, and he can't wait to recover while nightmares press against the seams of our reality. Tony Stark offers a 21st century solution. When astral travel fails, try astronautical travel. Enter Doctor Strange, Space Explorer Supreme. New spells, allies, and enemies, new and old, await Strange beyond the stars, along with corners and secrets of the universe. Space is endless, but time is short. After years of threats, Stephen's bill for magic use is coming due. Who will come to collect?
Excellent, yes. Good synopsis there over on Comixology for this issue. Really cool to see it laid out that way. But we will be getting in depth with all the points that we want to discuss about this episode. Usually what we do on our podcasts about all of our shows that we cover and about the comic books that we cover is we pick out a couple of points that we want to talk about that kind of cover the whole issue in part. With the comic books, because we're coming into a brand new series with Mark Waid, we're going to be doing incantations for Doctor Strange.
We certainly are.
Incantations 1 to 5 or 1 to 4. But first up, the way we kind of do our comic book ones is, just in case you missed the previous series, we have our incantation number 1, previously on Doctor Strange. For the eagle-eyed amongst you, you will have noticed on the front cover of this issue, the legacy number for this is Doctor Strange number 391, and our last issue that we covered was Doctor Strange 389. So we have skipped one issue of the coverage, which was Donny Cates' final issue, known as A Strange Way to Go, the finale of his Doctor Strange arc. And it was pretty strange. It was great fun, though.
It was really strange. It involved Spider-Man, it involved Bats the dog, and Zelma, as well as just a little bit of crazy trippiness between Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. I believe Spider-Man was talking with other spiders.
Yes, he used the magic of Doctor Strange to talk to a spider in a little crossover with Donny Cates, using the wonderful artwork of Chip Zdarsky, who is a great artist as well. So a lot of fun little center page spread. Highly recommend you going out and picking up that one just to see what someone who has had the shackles taken off them working with Doctor Strange does. It's really good fun.
Absolutely. And it was just a nice little fun story in between his previous run of Doctor Strange Damnation and the tie-in comics and into then Mark Waid's Sorcerer Supreme of the Galaxy. And with Damnation, Doctor Strange sold his soul to Mephisto. We had Las Vegas being controlled from the Hotel Damnation by Mephisto, collecting his souls. And ultimately, a team of collected superhero individuals from Moon Knight through to Ghost Rider, Iron Fist, as well as Man-Thing, all came together to help Doctor Strange escape his entanglement in the Hotel Damnation under the power of Mephisto. He used some pretty nasty tricks involving Clay, his former wife, his former lover, to trap him in there. He also had managed to damn the souls of the Avengers as well, to fight against the Midnight Suns, the new Midnight Suns, this team assembled by the ever-faithful Wong, as well as great stuff involving Bats the dog as well. But at the end of this run, we have Doctor Strange exhausted but returned to reality. Zelma, though, has left him. Bats is still with him. Wong is now back as a loyal ally of Doctor Strange, but no longer resides at the Sanctum Sanctorum at Bleecker Street. Zelma has gone, and Bats is still with him. So he's lost Zelma.
That's right, yeah. But he has got his Sanctum Sanctorum back. She has said, I'll see you in your dreams, kind of thing. So a little bit of a brush off from her. But we may see Zelma back in the future. Just definitely not at the start of this Mark Waid run. We do see him opening back up the Sanctum Sanctorum on 177A Bleecker Street. It's now back under the management of Doctor Strange, and he gets his first good night's sleep in months after going through all the trauma that was in Damnation. Just having some friends around him again. I think that's where we leave him. But John, do you want to tell us a little bit about Mark Waid's history with the character here? I think that's probably a good point to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely, because Mark Waid did a collected series of issues. The Doctor is Out. It was issues 1 to 4 from 2009, 2010. And there are parallels to The Doctor is Out with the current run that goes back to Damnation with Donny Cates, but also The Last Days of Magic by Jason Aaron, in that in the Doctor is Out, Doctor Strange has lost his magic. Magic has not gone from the universe like with Jason Aaron, and in terms of with Donny Cates, magic is starting to return, but it's really focused around amulets and different objects,
right,
trying to get those different sources to bring magic back into the world after the Empirical. But here we have Doctor Strange losing his magic, and it's associated with the run where Brother Voodoo takes over the mantle of Sorcerer Supreme.
Oh, very good.
It's a nice little novella, really, and it's enhanced by knowing the wider story of Brother Voodoo. I think some of the issues around it at the time was that it didn't add anything that much to it, but in it we have a girl called Cassie who is a natural at magic, and Doctor Strange teaching her and being a mentor for her, very much like Zelma. So there are a few parallels here with the current run from The Doctor is Out.
Right.
But I suspect in space, things will be very different.
Yeah, he's kind of disconnected from pretty much everything that we've seen and we've talked about in the past. Should we get on to the actual storyline itself, John? Incantation number 2, From Triumph to Tragedy, magic is disappearing from the universe.
Yes, I mean, it's that link again, isn't it, here? The issue opens up with Doctor Strange fighting Zaxel, an Elder God, which is brand new for the Doctor Strange universe. This has been created by Mark Waid. And you really think things have kind of moved on a lot from Las Vegas, from the Damnation run. And all of a sudden what we find is that this is 7 years ago, where Stephen Strange was this really assured Sorcerer Supreme. You know, he's using magic as the supreme controller of magic within this realm that he inhabits. You know, we see him using the flames of the Faltine against Zaxel. So it's a really nice moment opening up, and you do, until you reach the page where it says 7 years later, you realize that this was what used to happen. This was the triumph of Doctor Strange at the height of his powers, effectively.
And I have to say, he did feel really cocky here. He felt like that cocky Stephen Strange that we've seen in the past, that hasn't gone through all the trials and tribulations that he's been put through over the years to prove the reason why he should be the Sorcerer Supreme. He just felt like he was the Sorcerer Supreme because, well, that's what he's supposed to be. You know, it's a nice little opening to see that side of him. And now, 7 years later, we see a bit of a distraught Doctor Strange, kind of wishing he had those days. We see that he loses the second sight from his eyes, the ability to see the magic in the universe or the evil things in other dimensions that he has available to him, which is a really interesting start to this book. As you say, there have been a number of times in the past where magic has disappeared, or where magic users have stopped, or where Stephen's lost his powers. It's one of those things, they depower the hero quite often in comic books. It's a nice way to set them at a starting point in a storyline. But what you hear from Stephen is, throughout this story, that it's never completely gone from the universe in the past. He's never had a moment where he can't tap into magic in some other way by using his magic. This time, he's become a civilian again.
Yeah. It's really like, it's not only that it's gone from the universe, or, that it's much more disparate around the universe, but that it is going from him, his ability, his skill at using it has vanished, and it seems really, really personal. Certainly with the eyes going. I mean, it's a nice little touch where you just kind of get smoke coming out of the iris. Really nice touch in the artwork, and I think what sets it so nice is from that opening display of arrogance and triumph against Zaxel, is he's wandering around the Sanctum Sanctorum on his own. He's talking about the walls and sounds playing tricks with his mind. It's really getting into him. He's doubting himself and so on. And I think it's really nicely summed up with the quote that, other creatures are beginning to sense that the Sorcerer Supreme is neither the former nor the latter.
It's a great line, yeah.
It's a really nice line. This idea, it's the narrator here that's saying that. You see all these kind of shadows on the walls, but he has no idea. He doesn't know whether it's past presence of different magic entities, or he doesn't know whether he's just hearing things in this big creaky house on Bleecker Street. So it's a really nice moment, and I think it really comes to a fabulous visual for me on page 12 of the electronic version of this comic, actually. And I have to say, it's a really nice bit of artwork from Jesus Saez, in that you see him hugging the Cloak of Levitation. It's really great. I just love this picture of him. He's hugging it tightly because that's his comfort in a sense, and he feels like that's the only way he can hang on to any semblance of being the Sorcerer Supreme. So yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, well, importantly, what we see early on in this story is that, as we say, it disappears from his eye first, his left eye first, his right eye next. Then it disappears from his body, and then magic starts to disappear from everything around him. All of the tools that he used to use, the Cloak of Levitation, has lost its power of levitation. We see the Eye of Agamotto loses its power. Then we see the Sanctum Sanctorum losing all of its magic as well. And we see a skip of a month. We see a month go by when he is no longer living in the magical world that he's been inhabiting for these at least 7 years, according to the flashback, I suppose, at the beginning of the book. He's been at least there 7 years. But we have this moment where we have Doctor Strange, a person who's been justifying himself to all the other heroes who are going, we got superpowers, what have you got? And he's going, well, I'm the Sorcerer Supreme, I protect the world using magics. And now he can't use them. Now magic has been taken from the entire world, and he's having to deal with that. That's quite a huge step for Stephen Strange. It's quite different from what we've seen in the past. It's not just losing his powers and having to give over the mantle of Sorcerer Supreme to somebody else. There's nobody else because there's no magic.
Yeah, so it really shows the lasting consequences of the last days of magic for Stephen Strange, having magic taken out of the universe. He slowly built up his arsenal of magic again through different objects really using their power to allow him to cast spells. And now, again, it's beginning to fail here. So it's really, really interesting, because moving on to our incantation number 3, who does he go to? He goes to Tony Stark for help. Now, there are questions as to the parallels between these two characters, you know? Not only in terms of the old mustache, but in terms of their own behavior and arrogance.
Mustache bros.
Mustache bros, for certainty. But certainly they do hold certain traits around their personality that could be pretty off-putting, and it's probably the reason why they do kind of clash with one another, is that they're quite similar in some respects.
Oh, their arrogance is legendary throughout the Marvel Universe. It's made it all the way into the movies now, seeing the two of them on screen together, being completely arrogant to each other in Infinity War. It's totally there in the comics. I love the first thing that Doctor Strange basically says to Tony is an insult. He's coming to him for help because Tony's hit rock bottom before, and he's going, so what do you do when you hit rock bottom? It just comes across as this really ignorant, horrible thing to say to Tony. He does help him out, of course, because it's Tony. They have got a relationship where they help each other. But once again, it's something that works really well with those two characters, this man of science and this man of magic. You know, they don't tend to work very well together. They have very different beliefs in how the world works, but Tony's seen so much in his life, he can't deny that magic exists. And Strange knows that if there is no magic there, the closest thing that approximates that in the Marvel Universe is science, because science in the Marvel Universe does things that magic can only do.
Yeah, and he was a medical doctor as well, and I think that's kind of an interesting path here for Mark Waid. You know, he really has set up Doctor Strange here as not really liking the engineering and technology aspect that Tony proposes to him here. And I think it's a really nice proposal. You know, Doctor Strange was a man of science, and he learned to see beyond that with the magic. And as you say, Tony Stark has seen enough magic, but is a deep-rooted scientist. And so they come at it from different ways, in a sense. Mm-hmm. But here, Tony suggests that maybe because Doctor Strange can no longer move between other dimensions, effectively using his magic to find magic, that he should go out into space to find magic and answers in this universe, in this galaxy, instead of different dimensions and different realms.
Yes, or other galaxies, possibly.
Or other galaxies.
Idea, yeah. It's to get out of the local universe, get out of the Milky Way, and perhaps you might find what you're looking for.
Yeah.
If you have magic on Earth, you're probably going to have it somewhere else. It's a really logical thought from Tony, which I like. I think it's a nice touch, which kind of directly leads us on to where we're going to spend the most of our time for the rest of these issues. Incantation number 4, Strange Goes to Space, the Sorcerer Supreme of the galaxy.
Strange goes to space, or Strange is lost in space. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that Tony has offered him a spaceship here, and the first thing he says is, it's like driving a car. And of course, Doctor Strange hates driving a lot. And again,
understandable.
You know, moving back to the fact that he doesn't like this detachment from the galaxy, this engineering and technology solution that Tony Stark has offered. But in a sense, he accepts his predicaments. Tony has made that argument. And so we see him hurtling through space. Luckily, Tony Stark has been developing a intergalactic hyperdrive of some description.
Of course.
So
he has to do something with his weekend.
We see him going through space, but again, the parallels to his car accident. He is hit by a meteorite and crash lands on an uncharted planet that seemingly has no magic, or the inhabitants have no concept of magic. As one of the creatures on the planet says, what is magic? And he becomes stranded here on, pardon the pun, a strange planet, locked up all alone by the inhabitants of this strange world. And I love the final two panels for me, really, really good, because it was captured so well as well by the artwork, but he says, with no hope of escape, he struggled not to weep. I think I love that desperation that was embodied with the words and with the artwork here. The desperation of Strange. You know, he is experiencing his mortal form, and it's not just simply the humdrum like we see at the start of the comic book, where I think he's walking in the park and he's realizing that all magic has gone. He really is no different from the lady who sat on the park bench, but here he is experiencing his mortal form, where he has no way of getting off the planet now. He's been locked up and he's alone. He can't travel through time, space, other realms, other dimensions. He is here on terra firma, on this unusual planet, in this cell. And I really liked that. I thought it was quite melancholic. It was very downer, but
Yeah.
I thought it was a really nice way of doing it, and I think captured very well with the artwork.
Yeah, I definitely agree with, like, what's worse than being on your home planet without magic and being lonely and have nobody to talk to? Well, being on an alien planet after crash landing, the only way that you had to get off that planet, and being stuck on your own in a prison with no way off. Yeah, pretty much the lowest you can possibly go. You thought you were having a bad day beforehand, Stephen, and then you got involved with Tony and got sent off into space. Yeah, a pretty big downer for the end of our first episode of Mark Waid's run.
Yeah, really is.
But very exciting, though. I think I'm excited to see where Mark Waid's going to go, because obviously you can't have 6 more issues of Stephen stuck in a prison. There's going to be some way he's going to get out of this. But it is really intriguing to see Strange in a completely different situation than he's been in before. He mentions himself. He's been to space before. We've seen him in previous books like the Infinity War books. We've seen him in space before, but he doesn't like it. He doesn't go there often. He likes different realms and different dimensions much more than he likes going out into the vastness of space, as he says. So really intriguing premise to start us off.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is really intriguing to see Doctor Strange in space without his powers. He has to do things in a different way. He has to think about things differently. I'm really looking forward to that, for sure. And I mean, I think moving on to Incantation number 5, the other thing I'm looking forward to is the artwork. Briefly mentioned it before. 2 parts of the artwork here that I really, really enjoyed. One was on page 12 of the comic where, as I say, Doctor Strange is hugging the Cloak of Levitation, and it's just so nice. You have these long panels down the full length of the page, and as you move from left to right, the artwork pans out so he gets smaller and looks more isolated, but the panels get smaller and are enveloped by sort of a black background, and it really gives that sense of him alone in Bleecker Street, hanging on to his comforter, the Cloak of Levitation. And I think it really kind of connects nicely to seeing him at the end in the prison cell as well. All alone, but this time without his Cloak of Levitation to give him some kind of comfort, or at least bring him close to his former magical self that he remembers. So I thought that was really, really fantastic artwork there.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd have to highly compliment Jesus says for some of the artwork in the book. There's some really great touches as well. Just having all of those pieces, as you mentioned, John, having the big fight at the beginning, which is him sewing up the fabric of reality at the beginning. That's a really interesting stuff. Having the space stuff towards the end is really interesting, but also him dealing with the mundanity of life when you don't have magic in the world. There's some great sepia-toned pages early on in the book when he's walking past the woman on the bench in the park. That's really interesting to see, because it really does give you that dour feeling of what life would be like if Doctor Strange loses all his powers. He can't go back to being a surgeon either, because his hands don't work anymore. So that's quite interesting to see the world devoid of magic, because that's what they're trying to set up in here as to the motivator for Stephen to go out into space and try and find some magic relics. But yeah, overall, really good opening issue, I think.
Yeah, loved that sewing up of the fabric of reality as well. I mean, it's both literal and lovely in what it does over the page. Him trying and succeeding in keeping Zaxel's hordes out of Earth. The defender of Earth, from the magical and mystical threat. So really, really good artwork.
And using his surgical abilities with a bit of magic as well.
Exactly, yeah. So it's a nice image, definitely.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's the end of our incantations for the first issue of Doctor Strange. We'll definitely be talking about more of Doctor Strange. Overall, John, I'll hand it over to you. What did you think of this issue of Doctor Strange, the Sorcerer Supreme of Space? Do you defend it?
I do defend this issue of Doctor Strange, Sorcerer Supreme of the Galaxy, Part 1. I really, I think it's that I'm intrigued to see where it goes. This first issue is pretty simple in its story. It shows what used to be the desperation that he goes to on Earth, and then him going out into space at the suggestion of Tony Stark. I mean, that's it in a nutshell. But it brings an great amount of emotion. It brings a great amount of contrast into this. From the Doctor Strange as the arrogant, cocky Sorcerer Supreme. He knows the extent of his powers, and he doesn't feel threatened. To someone by the end of this comic book trying to hold back the tears in a prison cell in a distant planet in another galaxy. Really, really enjoyed that. I think some of that desperation brought in both on Earth in Bleecker Street as well as back in the cell. Again, really, really good. And I like the nods to the Doctor Strange lore, you know, the stitching up of reality back to his medical beginnings and to him actually keeping mystical and magical threats from Earth. It's a nice introduction to this run, and ultimately, it's Doctor Strange in space.
Yeah.
He doesn't go to space very often in the traditional sense of the word. He goes to other realms or other dimensions, or he bends and warps time and space, and he uses many different magical incantations. This is him without that, you know, stripped back, if you will.
Yeah.
And I'm really intrigued to see how Doctor Strange gets on in space with a spacecraft given to him by his mustache bro. And so I give this issue of Doctor Strange 3 spaceships out of 5.
Spaceships. Aw, that's cute. Yeah.
Space rockets.
Nice. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to continuing on with this series. We'll be back with our next review, issue 2 of this run of Doctor Strange, next week, and then once a week up until we've caught up with the current run. So make sure you're reading the comic books along with us.
Yes, cannot wait to see what issue 2 has in store for us.
And if you want to let us know your thoughts about Doctor Strange, any of the comic books at all, just email us at feedback@defenderstvpodcast.com and just mark it Doctor Strange so we know we're going to talk about it on this podcast. Thank you so much for joining us, fellow Defenders. Really looking forward to getting back to some more comic books.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, fellow Defenders, for joining us on this inaugural launch of Strange Tales on Defenders TV podcast. And if I don't get caught up in the vastness of space, then we will speak with you again next time. Bye.